Ahora vamos a dar paso a Maya. I'm going to read her bio. Maya Fernández Menicut lectures on literature and cinema at the University of the Basque Country, Spain. She is a researcher in gender studies and post-human studies and has been recently writing on the representation of gender and the post-human in science fiction and fantasy cinema and literature from the US and the UK, as well as on the use of Gothic conventions in those films. As a member of ReWest, a research group that specializes in the Western genre, she is particularly interested in analyzing the representation of American myths of the Far West in contemporary science fiction TV series.
There we go. Well, thank you. Okay. Are we ready? No, we don't seem to be ready.
Yeah.
Are we? Okay, there we go. So now that we have had this wonderful presentation that has led us to the iconic Count Dracula, I'm going to subvert it. So The Vampire in the Mirror is the title, the subversion of the myth of the vampire in Terry Pratchett's Carpe Eulogum. And I'm basing my analysis of Pratchett's Carpe Eulogum on two rather well-established concepts when it comes to Gothic fiction and literary representations of monstrosity in general. The first one is Julia Kristeva's definition of the abject as that which has only one quality, that of being opposed to I. What is abject? The jettisoned object is radically excluded and draws me toward the place where meaning collapses. The monster, the vampire in this case, is abjected, that is to say, cast away, forcibly separated from and away from the self. And this self, which can either be an individual or a collective discursive subject, tears the object away from itself because the self perceives it as opposite to the proper way of being. The object is the other that is no longer allowed to even exist in an oppositional relationship to the self, but must be exorcised, expelled, purged, turned to ashes, preferably after having hammered a stake through its heart, filled its mouth with garlic cloves, and chopped its head off. The object needs to be terminated in the most terminal of the ways or manners, because it draws me to a place where meaning collapses. In other words, because it exposes the limits and limitations of hegemonic discourse and of the meaning that hegemonic discourse gives to signifiers. To be confronted with the abject is to be confronted with the fact that rigid categorical boundaries are as much of an artificial construct as vampires are. The second concept is the transgression of Cartesian dichotomies, a black and white vision of the world in which everything is to fit neatly in either of the one versus other boxes. This obviously results in a most exclusive definition of subjectivity and peoplehood. The transgression of such rigid oppositional binarisms is a classic convention of Gothic fiction. And if there's something that Pratchett's conception of peoplehood is, it's open to and inclusive of other ways of being people. Pratchett's Discworld series, which comprises 41 novels, is a parody of our own round world, a literally and literally flat disc. This fantastical world is spinning on the backs of 4 monstrously giant elephants, which are in turn standing on the back of great Aituin, the cosmic turtle. A mishmash of different cosmogonic myths from around the round world, as you can probably tell. The point being that the Discworld series is raising a comically distorted mirror to human history, politics, philosophies, religions, cultures, behaviors, anxieties, and desires. One of the ways in which Pratchett achieves this is by taking all sorts of artistic conventions, literary, as is the case with Gothic conventions, cinematic, or typical of pop culture in general. For instance, in order to represent peoplehood in inclusive, horizontal terms, Pratchett takes all sorts of characters from various mythologies and folkloric traditions. You can see here that in the Night Watch of the biggest metropolis on Discworld, Ankh-Morpork, there is a golem. Where's the golem? Here's the golem. A troll over here. A female dwarf. You can tell that she has particularly beautifully styled beard. A female werewolf, You can't tell she's a werewolf. She is one, I promise. A human, here the hero goes, who was raised by dwarfs as a dwarf, despite his being 6+ feet tall. We also have Reginald the zombie. You can't really tell, but these are flies flying all around him. And then a regular human, like Surgeon Cullen right here, and someone who has to carry official papers around to prove that he is human. Nobby Nobs over here. One of the central themes in Pratchett's novels is, in fact, the acknowledgement of non-dualistic and non-anthropocentric ways of being through all sorts of fantastical minorities. It's the acknowledgement of non-anthropocentric and not dualistic ways of being, and he does so through all sorts of fantastical minorities, who these minorities are a rewriting of our own world's marginalized and often horrifically abused minorities. Take the undead. You can see them here. Take the undead, for instance, championed by the aforementioned Reginald the zombie, who are reclaiming their rights as people, chanting the slogan, undead yes, people no. So when it comes to the 23rd novel in the Discworld series, Carpe Jugulum, Seize the Throat in Latin, published in 1998, what I've done is apply the concepts of objection and the convention of transgression to the novel's central characters, the vampire family of the magpies. The result of my analysis of the way in which Pratchett has repurposed the myth of the vampire in popular culture is that these parodic versions of the Nosferatu become human themselves. And these results have led me to formulate the following interpretive thesis. Pratchett makes a transgressive use of convention and tradition in order to achieve a subversive transfiguration of the vampire into just another way of being human. One molded after a relational, anti-dualistic definition of peoplehood. Let's begin with the central metaphor for this paper, the mirror. Bram Stoker's Dracula is a composite monster, as we have just learned, whose traits have been gathered from several folkloric traditions. One of such traits is vampires' inability to have the image reflected in a mirror. Hence the following scene from the novel Dracula. This time there could be no error, for the man was close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder. But there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed, but there was no sign of a man in it except myself. Except myself. So if I look in a mirror and I only see myself, there are only two possible explanations. A, there's someone else by my side, but they're invisible, or cannot be reflected in a mirror for some inexplicable supernatural reason, or there's only me, and that's why there's only one person reflected in the ruddy mirror. I've mentioned the abject being the result of the self casting out a piece of themselves, which is consequently exorcised, which literally means sawn out of yourself. And so this definition of the abject is that which is unspeakable. It becomes unspeakable, or it was, and because it's unspeakable, I have to just let it out because it's unbearable to think of something in unthinkable terms. And so I must eventually destroy it. What if then I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I don't like what I see? And as a coping mechanism, I visualize that which I don't like of myself, or that which I fear, as a separate person to me. Then I turn around and voila, there's a vampire, an unspeakable monstrosity, an imaginary alter ego. That Pratchett reads vampires as imaginary alter egos of humans is made clear by his inversion of the part of the myth that requires someone bit by a vampire to also turn into a vampire. On the contrary, in the novel, the vampire family, at the center of the novel, the magpies, contract an infectious humanity from the old lady that they have bitten, which this turns them into a squabbling middle-class human family, mundane people who crave sweet tea and biscuits, just like the old lady does, and are constitutionally incapable of harming anyone because the old lady is. The old lady is none other than Granny Weatherwax, a rural witch who is both very human and on Discworld, witches are just women who have this gift for empathy, hard work, and psychology, or as Granny Weatherwax calls it, headology. And they are all profoundly humane, which makes Granny a perfectly imperfect, unique, quirky, admirable person whose moral compass unflinchingly points towards what's morally right. Her inclusive, anti-dualistic ethics give her the ability to see life and peoplehood beyond oppositional binarisms. But Pratchett takes this humanization of the formerly abjected monster even further. The Magpie family are set on conquering the neighboring realm and then the whole Discworld because Count Magpie, here goes, has murdered his father, the old Count, taken control of the family and leadership of the vampire clans, and is now, as the new Count Magpie, crowning his lifelong plan of infiltrating humanity, conquering the mistrust, our mistrust, and then literally conquering our lands, social structures, economic resources, and even human bodies as if we were livestock. To make his family, on the one hand, pass as humans, and on the other, resist the few remedies that human folklore has put in villagers' hands, the crosses, the garlic wreaths, the blessed water, circles of salt, bodies of running water, you name it. To counteract all of this, the young Count has conditioned his children to ignore or overcome superstitions. Their father would leap out in corridors and flick holy water on them and made them sleep on garlic pillows. Furthermore, amongst the vampire families of the Discworld, a new fad has emerged, a reversed goth undercurrent that has young vampires stay up until gone noon, wearing brightly colored clothes and giving themselves funny names like Gertrude and Pam. They think it's cool. Of course, only real weirdos find their teeth blunt, drink wine. By deconstructing the traditional representation of vampires in popular culture, Pratchett is deconstructing both our expectations on Roundworld and the expectations of the folks on Discworld. And by doing so, he's actually depicting an ambitious, cold-blooded, efficient young Count who is set on conquering the world regardless of its shape. Pratchett is de facto creating a satirical portrait of competent colonial and/or fascist forces. In fact, the monstrous part of the human self objected through and into the myth of vampire is a sort of terminally destructive force that many call evil. There are two kinds of evil monsters in Carpe Jugulum. The old Count, the classic vampire a la Dracula in Stoker's novel, and his adaptation by Bela Lugosi in Todd Browning's 1931 film, and who is a traditional lone predator, and the young Count, who is capable of organizing his appetites into an admirably efficient entire system of social predation. The young Count Magpie is no longer bound by tradition. Self-help, positive thinking, training, familiarity, garlic, a pleasant seasoning. He believes that ruthless survival of the fittest. That is, that if someone allows himself to be hurt, extinction looms, and that old versions of otherness should be abjected, cast away. Away with them! Let us progress. They are unfitted for survival. He intends to enslave humans to the new race of vampires, notice the fancy spelling, who will milk them. People are safe in Aspro. They've seen reason. No shutters on the windows, do you see? They don't have to bar their windows or hide in the cellar. They exchange fear for security. And as mentioned, he fantasizes with conquering the world with an iron fist in a silk glove, in a move that is not dissimilar to Hitler's invasion of Austria. The Count is just telling me how he's planning to move into the castle and rule the country. On the contrary, the old Count was rather taller than most men, and wearing an evening dress that might have been in style once upon a time. His hair was streaked with grey and brushed back over his ears in a way that gave the impression his hat had been designed for its aerodynamic efficiency. He is not any old vampire. It's the old Martha, old red eyes, he's back! The lisp being, of course, a reference to Marty Feldman's Iger in Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein, and the description being a mixed reference to both Bela Lugosi's and Christopher Lee's embodiments of Stoker's Dracula. The old Count is a monster, all right, but one who follows the rules, an old aristocrat who is as selfish and greedy as his son is, but doesn't pretend to be doing you a favour when he bites you into your neck and sucks you dry. He's a monster that is not posing as a progressive leader of the masses. An oppositional kind of otherness that is not trying to pass as a pillar of the community, a social hero, a messiah. The central theme of the novel is evil itself, which, in Granny Weatherwax's words, might come animal sharp in the night or greyly by day on a list. The old Count represents, of course, the sort of evil that comes sharp in the night, while the young Count, the sort that comes greyly by day on a list perhaps of names of people to be deported to a concentration camp. Of course, one might say that evil is evil, regardless of which one is the lesser one of the two. To quote again Granny Weatherwax, Pratchett's mouthpiece on Discworld, if I'm a vampire, I won't know good from evil. In other words, whether wild or civilized, a predator is always a predator, and the predation of people is always evil. However, the young Count version of vampires, while being as predatory as traditional vampires, these versions are represented as psychopathic politicians, not aristocrats, but charismatic parasites who exploit their victims while expected to be admired and thanked for it. Predators, parasitical predators who will milk these people away in a slow kind of death rather than a swift, sharp one. It follows that vampires are a metaphor for human capacity for evil. They are doppelgangers in this sense, but they are also a metaphor for human capacity to overcome evil. We create them to remind us that there are ways to be stronger than evil. To circle back to Jonathan Harker's looking at himself in the otherwise empty mirror, vampires are but human others in that they are human-made myths to explain human behavior. They are part of our discourse of identity construction. They die as humans. Nothing special about dying when someone's got a stake through your heart and hacked your head off. Their desires are human, even though they might be those of a psychopathic human. They are, in a nutshell, human. And yet, they are not everything that humans are. In fact, they are the parts of ourselves that we fear, hate, or simply don't accept. Conclusion: evil is human, and so is everything in between, and so is good, and everything in between. And Pratchett, what he's doing is handing the abject back to us as a constitutional part of our humanity. These are the works that I have cited. Thank you very much.